Season 5 is the last one, and the internet already has more theories than the show has episodes to answer them. Here are the ones that could actually happen. Let's get into it. Before we get into individual theories, it's worth setting the stage for why this final season carries so much weight. The show has spent 4 seasons building toward a genuinely uncertain endgame. Homelander hasn't been stopped. Vought hasn't been dismantled. Ryan's future is still completely open. And the people trying to fix any of it are more fractured, more damaged, and more compromised than they've ever been. That's not a setup for a clean, satisfying finish. That's a setup for a final season that could go in a lot of very different directions, and the fan theories floating around reflect exactly that uncertainty. Theory 1. Ryan becomes the actual final threat, not Homelander. This is probably the most discussed theory heading into the last season, and it's not hard to see why. The show has spent years building Ryan up as a wild card whose powers may already rival or exceed his father's, and every season has added more trauma, more manipulation, and more exposure to violence into his development. If the show wants to make a statement about whether power like this inevitably corrupts, the most devastating way to do it is to show that killing or removing Homelander doesn't actually solve anything. Because Ryan is next in line to become exactly what his father was, shaped by different hands, but heading toward a similar outcome. That's a bleak ending, but it's consistent with everything the show has been building about how this kind of power gets produced in the first place, not through individual villainy, but through systems and conditioning that outlast any one person. Theory 2. Homelander doesn't die in a fight. He gets outlived by the system that made him. A lot of fans want a big, cathartic final confrontation, where someone finally lands the killing blow on Homelander. But given how much time the show has spent establishing that Homelander's power is structural as much as physical, there's a real possibility the finale goes a different direction entirely. One where Homelander isn't defeated through violence at all, but through the collapse or transformation of the very system that's been protecting him. If Vaught's structure gets dismantled, if the public finally turns in a way that can't be spun, Homelander could end the show diminished, isolated, and powerless in every way that actually matters, without ever taking a fatal hit. That's a less action movie ending, but it fits the show's overall argument that this was never really about one man's strength. Theory 3. Butcher doesn't survive the season, and it's not a twist. It's a slow-motion inevitability the show has been building toward for years. Butcher's Temp V-induced tumor has been a ticking clock since it was introduced, and the show has been remarkably consistent about not walking that consequence back. Given how central his mortality has become to his arc, particularly his relationship with Ryan and his complicated loyalty to the team, there's a strong chance the final season treats his death not as a shocking twist, but as the payoff to a storyline that's been building patiently for multiple seasons. The real question isn't whether he survives, it's what he does and who he becomes in the time he has left, and whether his final choices redeem him, damn him, or land somewhere messier and more human than either extreme. Theory 4. Starlight ends up leading whatever comes after Vought, not as a traditional hero, but as someone who's learned exactly how much compromise this fight actually requires. Starlight's arc has consistently been about the tension between wanting to do genuine good and understanding how much this world punishes naive idealism. By the final season, she's made choices that would have horrified her Season 1 self, and that evolution suggests the show isn't building her toward a clean, uncomplicated victory. It's building her toward becoming someone capable of actually running the kind of fight this requires, which likely means an ending where she's less pure hero and more a hardened, morally compromised leader who's finally willing to do what the fight actually demands. That's a more interesting and more earned conclusion than a simple triumphant final stand. Theory 5. Neuman's role in the final season involves a betrayal that comes from inside her own alliance with Homelander, not from the boys. Neuman has spent multiple seasons playing every side against each other, and the show has been careful to never fully explain what she actually wants beyond power and survival. Given how volatile her arrangement with Homelander has been, there's a real possibility the final season pits them against each other directly. Not because the boys finally catch up to her, but because her own ambition eventually puts her in direct conflict with the one person as ruthless and unpredictable as she is. A Homelander versus Neuman conflict, even a brief one, would be one of the more unexpected but thematically consistent turns the show could take, because it would show two people who've spent the whole series manipulating everyone around them, finally running out of other people to manipulate. Theory 6. A-Train finally gets a redemption arc that actually sticks, and it costs him almost everything to earn it. A-Train's storyline has toggled between genuine growth and relapse into Vought's orbit for several seasons now, and that inconsistency has been intentional, reflecting how hard it actually is to walk away from an institution that's shaped your entire identity and livelihood. The final season is a natural place for that arc to resolve, one way or the other, and given how much groundwork has already been laid around his conscience and his growing discomfort with Vaught's methods, there's a real chance his redemption becomes real in the final season, but only after a cost significant enough to make it feel earned rather than convenient. Theory 7. The finale doesn't give Vought a clean collapse. It gives the company a rebrand, and the show ends on the uncomfortable note that the machine survives in a new form. This might be the darkest and most cynical theory floating around, but it's also one of the most consistent with everything the show has said about how institutions like Vought actually work. A tidy ending where Vought gets exposed, sued into oblivion, and shut down completely would be satisfying, but it would also undercut years of the show arguing that this kind of institutional power doesn't just disappear because a few individual villains get taken down. A more unsettling, more realistic ending has Vought surviving in some diminished or rebranded form, a reminder that dismantling the people at the top doesn't automatically dismantle the structure underneath them. If you've got your own theory brewing, hit that like button and subscribe before we keep going, because we're breaking down every angle of this final season, and there's a lot more ground to cover. Theory 8. Hughie ends up being the one who exposes the full truth to the public, not through violence, but through information, and it's this, not any single fight, that actually shifts the balance of power. Given how much of Hughie's value across the show has come from research, patience, and understanding how narratives get built and broken, it would be a fitting conclusion for the final season to hinge on him finally getting the full, undeniable truth about Vought and Homelander in front of the public in a way that can't be spun away. That's not as cinematic as a final showdown, but it's consistent with the character the show has actually built over 5 seasons. Someone whose real power was never physical strength, but the willingness to keep digging until the truth finally became impossible to bury. Theory 9. Ryan's ending isn't villain or hero. It's somewhere the show has never actually let a character land before. A genuinely uncertain, unresolved future that refuses to give the audience a clean answer either way. Given how much weight the show has put on the question of whether Ryan is destined to repeat his father's path, there's a real possibility the finale deliberately avoids answering that question definitively. Instead of showing Ryan become a hero or become the next Homelander, the show could end with his future still genuinely open, an intentional choice that forces the audience to sit with the same uncertainty the characters are sitting with, rather than handing out a comforting or devastating conclusion either way. Theory 10. Kimiko's arc ends with her stepping fully out of the fight, not out of weakness, but because she's the one character who's earned the right to choose a life beyond constant violence. Kimiko's entire journey has been about reclaiming agency after years of being used as a weapon by other people, And the show has been deliberate about giving her small moments of choice, of quiet, of connection with Frenchie, that stand apart from the larger war against Vought. A final season that lets her walk away, not because she's given up, but because she's finally allowed to decide her own ending, instead of having it decided for her, would be one of the more quietly powerful notes the show could hit, especially for a character whose entire arc has been about regaining exactly that kind of control. Theory 11. Frenchie doesn't get a clean redemption either, and the show finally makes him sit with the full weight of what he's done, instead of letting his charm carry him through to the end. Frenchie has spent the whole series being one of the more likable, more sympathetic members of the team, which has occasionally let the show underplay just how much damage he's caused along the way. A final season willing to hold him fully accountable, rather than let his loyalty and his humor smooth everything over, would be a more honest conclusion for a character who's been quietly getting away with a lot for a long time. It wouldn't need to be punishing for the sake of punishment. It would just need to finally ask him to reckon with the same kind of moral weight the show has made every other major character carry. Theory 12. The final season introduces the idea that Compound V itself, not any single soup, is the actual villain the show has been building toward the entire time. Every major conflict in this show traces back to the same root cause, a substance that turns ordinary people into something else entirely, distributed and controlled by an organization that's never once used it responsibly. A final season that makes this explicit, that frames the entire 5-season conflict as a consequence of Compound V's existence, rather than any individual character's choices, would tie the whole show together thematically, even if it doesn't resolve as a traditional villain-defeated ending. It would suggest that the real fight was never against Homelander or Vought specifically, but against the underlying thing that makes a Homelander or a Vought possible in the first place. Theory 13. Sister Sage plays a bigger role in the finale than her current position suggests, and it's her strategic mind, not anyone's raw power, that ends up tipping the entire balance one way or the other. Sage was introduced as the smartest person in the world, and a show this interested in undercutting pure power fantasies would be wasting an obvious opportunity if it didn't eventually let her intelligence matter more than anyone's strength in determining how the endgame actually plays out. Whether she ends up helping bring Vought down from the inside, or becomes the reason the machine survives in a new form, depends entirely on where her loyalties actually land, which the show has kept deliberately murky. That ambiguity makes her one of the most unpredictable pieces on the board heading into the final stretch. Now here's the through line connecting almost every one of these theories, and it's worth naming directly. This show has never really been about whether the good guys can beat the bad guys in a fight. It's been about whether a system this deeply entrenched, this well protected, this good at manufacturing its own heroes and burying its own truths, can actually be changed at all. Every theory worth taking seriously, heading into the final season, engages with that question directly, instead of just asking who wins the last fight. That's why the most likely ending probably isn't the cleanest one. It's probably messier, more compromised, and more ambiguous than a typical finale, because the show has spent 5 seasons building an argument that clean, satisfying victories against systems like Vought are exactly the kind of story Vought itself would want you to believe in. So here's the question worth sitting with heading into the final season. Which of these theories do you think actually happens? And is there an ending you're hoping for that isn't on this list at all? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more theory breakdowns and deep dives as the final season unfolds, subscribe to the channel, because we're covering every angle of this ending as it happens. Because in this universe, the scariest ending was never a fight. It's finding out whether anything actually changes once the fighting stops.